My son's wife spent years turning him against me. Eventually, they cut me out of their lives completely. For 11 years, I never heard a word from either of them. Then I sold my welding shop for $22 million and bought a ranch where nobody could bother me. A week later, they showed up at my gate, smiling. "Daddy, we're moving in with our son," my daughter-in-law announced. I looked at them for a long moment, nodded, and did one thing that neither of them ever expected. I opened the gate and let them in. I want to be clear from the start that it was not forgiveness. Forgiveness was nowhere on that gravel driveway. What was on that driveway was a black SUV, 2 years old, with a dented rear quarter panel, 7 suitcases, a folded-up scooter, a guitar case, and a cat carrier. 7 suitcases and a cat carrier. Nobody packs 7 suitcases and a cat for a weekend visit, and nobody who knows me would believe I missed that detail. I spent 43 years running a welding shop where missing a detail got a man crushed or burned. I do not miss details. I just decided, standing at that gate, not to say anything about them yet. My daughter-in-law came toward me with her arms already opening, wearing a cream-colored coat that had no business in Texas Hill Country in October, and I stepped sideways and let her hug the air. She covered it with a little laugh and said I was always so prickly. Behind her stood my son, and I am ashamed to say I almost didn't recognize him. He had put on 40 pounds since the last photograph I'd seen, and his hair was thin and damp against his forehead. He was 41 years old and he looked 55. He said, "Hey, Dad," and his voice cracked in the middle of it, and then he looked at his shoes. And behind both of them, half hidden behind the suitcases, stood the reason I opened the gate. The boy was 13. I had only ever seen him as a baby, but he had his father's dark hair and his grandmother's mouth, my late wife's exact mouth, and seeing it on that driveway after everything took the wind out of me for a second. He was thin in the way that makes you do math you don't want to do. His wrist bones showed where his sleeve ended. There was a bruise on his cheekbone, yellow-green, the color of old mustard, maybe 5 or 6 days along. He did not look at me. He looked at the gravel like he was counting the stones, and when his mother squeezed his shoulder and said, "Hasn't he been begging to meet his grandpa?" he did not move, and he did not speak. My daughter-in-law announced for the second time that they were moving in. She said it the way you'd announce good news to a man who should be grateful. She said the drive from Nevada had been so long, and the boy was so tired, and couldn't we do all the catching up inside, Daddy, because look at this place, look at all of this. You really did it. The daddy was new. For the 11 years she had been married to my son. On the rare occasions she spoke to me at all, she had used my first name like it tasted bad. Now I was Daddy. A man learns to read the temperature of a weld by its color. I read the temperature of that word just fine. I looked at the three of them for a long moment. Then I said, "Leave the bags," and I held the door open, and I let the people who had buried me alive for 11 years walk into my house. I should back up and tell you what those 11 years were. My son got married at 28 to a woman my late wife and I had met exactly 4 times before the wedding. From the first dinner, she took inventory, not of us, of the house. Her eyes went over the furniture and the truck in the driveway and the size of the shop when we drove past it, and I watched her do the arithmetic. My wife saw it too. My wife was gentler than me about everything on this earth, and even she came home from that first dinner quiet, and when I asked her what she thought, she stirred her coffee for a while and said, "She's going to take him somewhere we can't follow." It didn't happen all at once. It never does. First it was holidays that got shortened, then holidays that got canceled the morning of. Then it was my son repeating opinions that were not his, in words that were not his, about how I had been controlling, how I had pushed him too hard at the shop, how his childhood had been some kind of boot camp. My son worked summers for me, sweeping floors and learning to read a tape measure, and I paid him better than I paid anyone his age, and until he met her, he told that story with pride. After her, the same summers became evidence at a trial I hadn't known I was attending. The last conversation happened in my own kitchen. He sat at the table his mother had set for 30 years and told me his wife was right about me, that I was a controlling old man who had ruined his life and that I would never see his son. Then they moved to Nevada and did not give me the address. I got it anyway, through a man I knew, because I am not the kind of man who lets people disappear with his only grandchild, but I never used it. I told myself I was respecting his choice. I have had 2 years now to think about whether that was respect or pride, and I have not liked the answer. I sent the boy a card on his 4th birthday with $200 in it. It came back marked "Return to Sender" in my son's handwriting. I kept the envelope. It is in my desk drawer to this day. Then my wife got her diagnosis. I called my son 11 times. I counted, because each time I wrote the date on the pad by the phone, the way I logged everything at the shop. He did not call back, not once. His mother wrote him a letter in her own hand when her hands could still hold a pen, and we never heard a word. She died in March, on a Tuesday morning, asking for him. He did not come to the funeral. He sent flowers from a 1-800 number with a card that said "from the family" in a stranger's handwriting. I keep that card in the same drawer as the birthday envelope. Some men keep a drawer of bullets. I keep a drawer of paper. 2 years after I buried her, I sold the shop. 43 years of pipe racks and structural steel and refinery bones down on the Gulf Coast, sold to a Houston outfit for $22 million. It made a trade magazine. Remember that detail. It matters more than anything else in this story, because as near as I can figure, that article is the only reason anyone rang my gate at all. Inside, my daughter-in-law toured my house like an appraiser. She did not sit down for the first 10 minutes. She walked the front room, trailing her fingers along the furniture furniture, asking how many bedrooms, 5, 6, and saying the kitchen had to be $60,000 at least, and didn't her husband think it was all just lovely? My son grunted from the edge of an armchair. He sat the way a man sits in a doctor's waiting room, like the furniture might bite him, like he had no right to lean back in his own father's house, which, to be fair, he didn't. Nobody had told the boy to sit, so the boy did not sit. He stood against the wall with his arms wrapped around himself, and I watched him and felt the math finishing itself in my head. The thinness, the bruise, the way he checked his mother's face before doing anything at all, the way a beaten dog checks the boot. I said his name and told him to come sit by me. He looked at his mother first. She gave him a tiny, quick nod, a handler's nod, and he came over and sat on the very edge of the cushion with 6 inches of air between us. Up close, he smelled like a boy who had been wearing the same shirt for 3 days, because I would learn later he had been. I asked him if he was hungry. He nodded once, a single drop of a chin. I asked him when he ate last, and his eyes went to his mother again, and I said, "Don't look at her, look at me." And the room went very still, and he whispered, "Yesterday. I want to tell you what happened in my chest when my grandson said yesterday, because if you don't understand that, you won't understand anything I did afterward." It was not rage. Rage came later and stayed. What came first was a cold, settled thing. The same thing I felt in 1981 when a length of falling pipe broke a man's leg on my crew, and I had to be the one to kneel down and tell him he was going to lose it. It is the feeling of a decision making itself, the way you decide that a thing, whatever it costs, has to end. I got up and went to the kitchen and made that boy a sandwich the size of a brick. Turkey, Swiss, tomato, a pickle on the plate, chips, a glass of cold whole milk. I set it on the coffee table in front of him and said, "Eat." And he ate like a dog that has been kicked away from every bowl it ever found. His mother watched him with a tight, embarrassed look, and she got as far as opening her mouth, and I said, "If you make one comment about that boy's manners, I will put you out of this house right now." She closed her mouth. It was the first honest expression I'd seen on her face since the gate, and it was fear, and it lasted half a second, and I filed it away. While the boy ate, she recovered and started her speech. I could tell it was rehearsed because the sentences had no seams. They had missed me so much. My son had cried over the estrangement, had cried, "Daddy." The whole business around the funeral had been blown so far out of proportion. And now that all that distance was behind us, wasn't it time to heal as a family? And oh, by the way, they were in a tight spot. She wouldn't pretend otherwise. My son had been let go from the dealership in August through no fault of his own, and the boy needed his family, and when they saw the article about the sale, $22 million. Daddy, his mother would have been so proud, and I said quietly, "Don't say her name." And she stopped. And the clock on the mantel was the only sound except my grandson, still eating. That evening, I asked the boy to help me carry firewood. There is a gas fireplace in that house, and I have not burned a stick of wood in it since I bought the place, but his mother didn't know that, and neither did he. Out back, behind the garage, with the sun going down red behind the live oaks and the cicadas starting up, I stacked 3 logs in his arms so his hands would be busy, and he wouldn't have to look at me, and I asked him one question at a time, slow, with silence in between, the way you feed a fire that's almost out. I asked about the bruise. He said he fell off his scooter. I said, "Son, I poured concrete with men who lied better than that before you were born." Silence. 3 more logs. Then, to the woodpile, not to me. He said his mother had backhanded him at a gas station in New Mexico because he asked if he could have a Coke. He said it flat, like a weather report, and that flatness scared me worse than the bruise did. A boy who is surprised by getting hit cries about it. A boy who reports it like rainfall has been living in that climate a long time. I asked when he'd eaten before the sandwich. "Yesterday morning," he said. "A gas station hot dog." His parents had eaten at a diner in the afternoon while he waited in the car with the cat because his mother said money was tight and he'd had the hot dog. I stood there in my own backyard, a 67-year-old man with $22 million in the bank, listening to my only grandchild explain the economics of a hot dog, and I made my decision final. Here is the thing I want you to understand, because everything that follows hangs on it. I could have thrown his parents out that night. Every right, every reason. They were braced for it. I could see it on her. The mask of righteous indignation already half built, ready for whatever sympathetic neighbor or sheriff's deputy she planned to perform it for. And if I had done that, they would have driven away into the dark with 7 suitcases, a cat, and my grandson. And I would have spent the rest of my life learning what happened to him from court records, if I ever learned at all. So I did the one thing that neither of them ever expected. I went back inside and I smiled, and I told them they could stay. Not the master bedroom, I said when her face lit up like a slot machine. 2 guest rooms on the back hall. Stay out of my office, stay out of the master, stay out of the garage. And we were not going to call it a healing visit or a family reunion because it wasn't one. "You're broke and you need a place to land," I said. "Fine, 2 weeks. After that, we talk about what comes next." She tried to negotiate the 2 weeks on the spot. "Daddy, that's barely time to settle." And I said 2 weeks or the car. And I watched her swallow it. And I watched her, behind her eyes, already drafting the plan to turn 2 weeks into 2 months into the deed to the ranch. That was fine. I wanted her making plans. A person who is making plans is a person who is not paying attention to yours. That night, after they had hauled the 7 suitcases down the back hall, and she had complained about the size of the guest closets loudly enough for me to hear it through 2 doors, I sat in my office, locked the door, and made 2 phone calls. The first was to my attorney. She has been my lawyer for 31 31 years. She is 72 years old, she stands 4'11" in courtroom heels, and she is the meanest creature I have ever met outside of a bull pasture, and I mean that as the highest compliment I know how to pay. I told her everything. The 11 years, the funeral, the article about the sale, the 7 suitcases, the bruise, the hot dog. She listened the way she always listens, in total silence. No little sounds, nothing, so that you start to wonder if the line went dead. And when I finished, she asked exactly one question. How thin is the boy? I told her. There was a pause, and then her voice changed into the one I'd only heard a few times in 31 years, the flat one. And she said, all right, here is what we are going to do, and here is what you are absolutely not going to do. I want a private investigator on your son and his wife by tomorrow morning, she said. Nobody drives 7 suitcases and a cat across 3 states for a healing visit. They are running from something, and before we make a single move, I want to know what it is. And you are going to do the hardest thing I have ever asked of you. You are going to be sweet. You are going to play the soft, declining old man. You are going to let her think she's winning. Do not lose your temper. Do not threaten them. Do not let them see you watching. You give people like her rope, and they will hang themselves with it and charge you for the rope. Can you do that? I said I could. She said you have always been a poor liar. I said I would learn. She said one more thing. The boy is the whole case. Everything we do clean. Because if we do it ugly, a judge in a custody hearing will make us eat every ugly piece of it. Are you hearing me? I was hearing her. The second call was to a man who used to run safety audits for my shop and who now operates a quiet little firm out of San Antonio that finds things people would rather keep lost. I gave him the names, the last known address in Nevada, and a 72-hour deadline, and I told him I did not care what it cost. He asked if there was anything specific. I said yes. The boy, 13 years old. School records, medical records, anything with his name on it. He was quiet a second, and then he said, understood, in the tone of a man who has pulled that thread before and knows what tends to be on the end of it. I hung up and sat at my desk for a long time. The drawer with the funeral card and the returned birthday envelope was 6 inches from my right hand. I did not open it. My wife had kept a closet shelf of presents for that boy that she never got to send, wrapped and labeled in her handwriting, and they were sitting that very night in the closet of the room he was sleeping in, and he did not know it, and I could not decide whether that was the saddest fact in the house or the most hopeful one. The next morning I started playing the part, and I'm here to tell you that pretending to be a sweet, fading old man for the benefit of a predator in your own house is the hardest physical labor I have done since I quit running beads overhead in August heat. I let her take over my kitchen. She ordered $300 of groceries on my credit card on Wednesday and $400 more on Friday. Organic this and imported that, none of which the boy was offered first, I noticed. I noticed everything. I let her hire a cleaning lady I never asked for. A sweet local woman she immediately began ordering around like staff at a resort. I let her rearrange my late wife's sitting room because the energy was all wrong, Daddy, and I stood in the doorway with my coffee and watched her move my wife's reading chair to the garage wall, and I smiled and said, whatever makes you comfortable, sweetheart. And then I went out to my truck and sat in it with my hands at 10 and 2 for a quarter of an hour until I could trust my own face again. I shuffled a little when I walked, when she was watching. I let her catch me standing in the pantry like I'd forgotten why I came in. I repeated myself at dinner, told the same story about the shop twice in one meal, and watched her exchange a look with my son that she didn't bother to hide. A look that said, see, told you, the lights are going out. My son, to whatever credit is left him, looked away. She did not. She looked at me the way a woman looks at a house she's already decorating. And every afternoon she got on the phone with her sister in San Diego and walked the front porch in her cream coat, performing concern at full volume. Daddy is really declining, she'd say. He's so confused, bless his heart. Honestly, it's lucky we came when we did. Somebody has to look after his affairs. You should see how he just leaves mail laying around. Anyone could take advantage of a man in his condition. I sat inside by the window with my crossword and listened to her diagnose me to a woman I'd never met, and I wrote the date and the time on the corner of the puzzle page, the way I used to log near misses at the shop. By the end of the first week, the margins of my crossword book read like an accident report. She was right about one thing. Somebody in that house was being taken advantage of by somebody in his condition. She just had the names reversed. What she did not know, what neither of them ever thought to wonder, is that when a man spends 43 years responsible for crews working around crane loads and live current, he develops certain habits about visibility. There is a camera in every room of my house except the bedrooms and the bathrooms. Not hidden exactly, just small and high, and the kind of thing you only notice if you have ever had a reason to look for cameras. I had them put in when I bought the place, a 67-year-old widower alone on 12 acres, and the man who installed them said most folks my age get them for burglars. I remember telling him burglars come in all kinds. On the 4th afternoon, I announced I was going to take a nap, recited it twice for effect, and shuffled off to the master. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and watched my phone, and inside of 6 minutes my office door opened on the screen and my daughter-in-law walked in like she owned the deed already. She went through my desk without hurrying. She had a notepad. She found the bank statements I had left in the second drawer, and I want to be honest with you, I had left them there the way you leave cheese in a trap. Current statements, account numbers visible, balances that would make a careful person careless. She photographed them with her phone and then copied figures letters onto her notepad anyway, belt and suspenders, and her lips moved while she wrote, and the camera caught all of it in high definition with a timestamp in the corner, 11 minutes. Then she squared the papers the way she'd found them almost, and let herself out. I lay back on my bed and stared at the ceiling and felt the strangest thing. Not anger, a kind of grim satisfaction, the feeling of a suspicion paying off like a weld holding under load, and under that, lower down, a grief I couldn't put a name on for a while until I realized it was for my son, because whatever she was building in that notepad, he was going to be standing next to her when it fell. I tried with him, I want that on the record. On the Thursday, I sat down next to him during a commercial, his fourth bourbon of the afternoon sweating on my coaster, and I said, "Son, what happened to you?" He kept his eyes on the television, and for a long time I thought he wasn't going to answer, and then he said, in a voice I hadn't heard since he was a teenager, caught at something, "Dad, just let her run her play. Please, it'll be easier." "Easier for who?" I said. He didn't answer. He picked up the remote and turned the volume up 2 bars, and that was my son's entire testimony on the matter. 2 bars of volume, and I sat beside him through a commercial for reverse mortgages and understood that the boy I taught to read a tape measure was gone and had been gone for years, and that what was sitting on my couch was the husk that woman drove around in. But the boy, let me tell you about the boy, because those 9 days were not all surveillance and cold arithmetic. Those 9 days also contained the back porch, and the back porch is where I got my family back, one sandwich at a time. It started the 3rd evening. He had not been eating dinner with us. His mother kept saying he was settling, which I came to understand meant she preferred him out of sight when she was performing. So I went down the back hall and knocked on his door and said, "Son, come eat with your grandpa. Just us, out back, bring whatever you want from the kitchen." He came out carrying a peanut butter sandwich, and it took me a minute to understand why, and when I did it nearly put me on the floor. He didn't know he was allowed to ask for anything else. 13 years old, standing in a kitchen his mother had stocked with $700 of my groceries, and he made himself the food that doesn't get you in trouble. We sat on the porch while the sun went down behind the live oaks, and I did not ask him one single question for 20 minutes. I have hired 500 men in my life, and I know how to let a silence do the work. The deer came out at the tree line, and I told him the big doe shows up most evenings, and after a while I asked him, "If you could name anything in the world, what would you name her?" And he looked at me to check it wasn't a trick, and then he gave that doe a name, an old lady name, prim and serious, and the ghost of a smile moved at the corner of his mouth, the first one I'd seen. He told me he had always wanted to name something. His mother said pets were stupid, except the cat, and she had named the cat. Over the next evenings, in pieces, in fragments dropped between bites and stared down at the porch boards, I learned my grandson's life. He had not been inside a real school in 2 years. His mother had pulled him out of 7th grade to homeschool him, and the homeschooling had consisted of nothing at all. He could read fine, thank God. He read whatever he could find, but he had not done a math problem in 18 months, and when I slid a paper placemat with the states on it across the table, he could not put his finger on Texas. He was sitting in it at the time. I learned they had been evicted the week before they arrived at my gate, and that he had stood on the sidewalk holding the cat carrier while a sheriff's deputy stacked everything he owned next to a dumpster. I learned that they had moved 6 times in 4 years, that his father had not held a steady job in 3, that the money came from his mother, who did something on a computer he didn't understand, but that involved her being very angry on the phone and them leaving towns quickly. I learned that the cat was the only friend he had on this earth, and that twice in the last month his mother had threatened to put it out by the side of the highway if he didn't behave. And I learned, on the 5th evening, with his eyes on the boards and his voice flat as a parking lot, that the school nurse had asked about his arm once, back in the spring, before his mother moved them out of that district. He didn't say more than that, and I didn't push, because I already had a man in San Antonio pulling that thread, and because some things a boy should only have to say once to the right people with a lawyer in the room. On the 6th evening, I taught him to cast a fly rod on the back lawn. No hook, just the line. The 2 of us painting big, slow loops in the air while the cicadas roared. I had bought that rod 3 weeks earlier, the week I moved in, with some half-formed idea about learning to be a retired man, and I was terrible with it, and it turned out being terrible at something in front of him was the most useful thing I did all week. He laughed at me. Quick, startled, 1 syllable, and he clapped his hand over his mouth like laughter was a glass he'd knocked over. I said, "Son, in this house, you laugh at your grandpa whenever he's got it coming, and I will tell you for free, he's going to have it coming a lot." And he tried the rod, and he was better at it than me inside of 10 minutes, because 13-year-old wrists are magic, and when the line rolled out straight and soft the first time, he turned around to see if I had seen it. I had seen it. That is the part of this I can't tell out loud without stopping for a minute. Not the bruise, not the hot dog, the turning around. A boy turning around to see if somebody saw. That is the whole job, right there. That is the entire job of every parent and grandparent who ever lived, to be standing there when they turn around, and that boy had been turning around for 13 years to find nobody at all. There was one more thing, and I debated whether to tell it. The room he was sleeping in had a closet, and on the shelf of that closet sat a row of wrapped presents in paper gone soft with age, each with a tag in my late wife's handwriting, for his first Christmas, his second birthday, his third. She bought them every year and never got to send them, and after she died I could not throw them away and could not look at them, so they sat on that shelf like evidence. On the 7th morning he found found them. He came to breakfast holding one, careful, both hands like it was live ordnance, and he asked very quietly, "Whose are these?" And I told him, "They're yours, son. Every one of them has been yours the whole time. Your grandmother bought them, and the mail kept bringing them back, so she saved them, because she figured one day you'd come get them yourself." He didn't open them at breakfast. He took them back to his room, and that night through the door, I heard paper tearing, slow, one careful inch at a time. A boy trying to make 5 Christmases last. The smallest box had a toy truck in it, a welding rig, a flatbed with a little crane, the kind of thing she'd have picked out laughing at herself in the store aisle. He is 15 now, and it sits on the shelf over his bed, and his friends think it's a toy, and he has never once corrected them. On the 8th day, the report came in. 21 pages delivered to a private email address my daughter-in-law didn't know existed, and I read it twice through at my desk with my office door locked while she laughed at something on the television down the hall. Page 1. My daughter-in-law's name was not her name. The woman who had married my son, the woman my wife had set a table for, had been born under a different name entirely, with a different birthday, in a different state than she claimed. The name she used now was her third. Pages 2 through 9. She had active warrants in 2 states. In Nevada, for grand theft from an elderly couple in Carson City, a retired school teacher and her husband, who had hired her through an agency as a part-time home health aide. Over 4 months, she had drained $46,000 from their accounts in transfers small enough to swim under the bank's alarms, and they had not noticed until their property tax bounced. In Oregon, an earlier case, same shape, different victims, a widower this time, 81 years old. The Reno police had knocked on her apartment door the day after the eviction. They had missed her by 6 hours. 6 hours. The healing visit to Daddy's ranch had left at dawn. Pages 10 through 13. My son. Not wanted for anything, which I noted with the small, bitter gratitude of a father grating on the deepest curve there is. 2 DUIs in 5 years. A suspended license, which meant he had let his 13-year-old ride 1,000 miles across the desert with a driver who legally should not have been behind the wheel. And the dealership had not laid him off in August. He had been caught taking customer down payments and pocketing them, and the only reason he wasn't sitting in a cell next to a phone that never rang was that his manager was an old high school friend who took pity and showed him the door instead of the law. Pages 14 through 21 were about the boy, and those are the pages I will not quote from. Not fully, not to anyone, not ever. I will tell you only the one fact the whole rest of this story turned on. In March of the previous year, a school nurse in Nevada had examined my grandson and recorded in her notes a contusion on his upper left arm in the shape of a hand, adult-sized. She had filed the report she was required to file. A caseworker had visited the apartment once, and my daughter-in-law had explained that the boy was clumsy and roughhoused with his cousins. He does not have any cousins. The file was closed for lack of follow-up because 2 weeks later she had pulled him from the school and moved him out of the district, the way she had moved before and would have moved again, the way she was already, in a notepad in my guest room, planning to move into my house and wait for me to die. I read it the second time slower than the first. Then I squared the pages, set them down, and looked at my hands on the desk. 43 years of slag burns and stick welding, and they were dead steady. That part matters. A man should know what his hands do when the worst thing he ever read is sitting in front of him. Mine go quiet. Then I picked up the phone and called my attorney and said, "It's worse than I thought," and she said, "It always is. Tell me." And I told her, and there was a silence on the line that I have come to understand is the sound of that woman deciding to end somebody. My attorney laid the plan out in the flat voice, and the plan was a Sunday. "You are going to invite people over," she said. "Not many. Your old friend from the shop, the big one, because I want a calm, immovable object in that room. The investigator with his documentation. Me with mine. And the county sheriff, who I happen to have gone to law school with, and who you are going to call personally and ask to come in plain clothes with one deputy. Everything gets laid on the table at the same time, in the same room. Because the one thing a woman like this cannot survive is simultaneity. Give her facts one at a time and she will spin each one before the next lands. She has done it her whole life. It is the only genuine skill she has. Give her all of it at once with a sheriff leaning on the door frame, and there is no story big enough. And somewhere in the first 2 minutes she will understand that, and you will see it happen in her face. I have been doing this for 50 years. The face is the verdict. And the boy, I said. The boy is the whole case, she said. Same as the first night. Child Services will be standing by Sunday quietly, and we file for emergency temporary guardianship Monday at 9. You will make a sworn statement. The nurse's report does the heavy lifting, your testimony and the investigator's file do the rest, and your son will be given a choice, and I want to prepare you for it now, in advance, while you can hear it. He is going to be offered a clean exit, and his wife is going to be standing right there when he is. I have run this play many times, and I am telling you, the weak ones stand with the strong ones. They go down holding the hand that dragged them under. Do not build any hopes on that man doing the right thing, because if you build them, Sunday will break them in front of witnesses. I told her I understood. I did not understand. A father never does. You can know a thing all the way through and still walk around with one stupid coal of hope in your shirt pocket, and I carried mine right into that Sunday, and you'll see what it bought me. The Friday night before, I sat the boy down on the porch and told him as much truth as a 13-year-old should have to hold. Some people are coming Sunday, I said. Friends of mine. There's going to be a hard conversation conversation with your mom and dad, and after it, things are going to change. What I need from you is to stay in your room with the cat, door shut, no matter what you hear, until I come get you myself. Can you do that?" He nodded, and then he asked the question, the one I'd been waiting for and dreading. In a voice so small, the cicadas nearly took it. "Are they going to take me away from you?" I had to look at the tree line for a minute before I could answer, and I want to be honest about that minute, because in it I was not calm. I was a man holding a cracking dam with his bare face. Then I said, "No, son, no. Your grandpa has the meanest lawyer in the state and more money than sense, and you are going to live with me if you want to." And he said, "I want to," fast, before I'd even finished, like the words had been loaded for days. And then he scooted across the porch boards and put his head against my shoulder. 90 pounds of boy, and the dam did what dams do, and the deer came out at the tree line, and neither of us said anything else, and nothing else needed saying. Saturday night, the cameras handed me the last nail. She took her evening call on the front porch as usual, but this time the good mood had champagne in it. I sat in the dark of the dining room with my phone and an earpiece, and listened to my daughter-in-law tell her sister the future. Daddy had agreed to extend their stay, she said, which was news to me since I had agreed to no such thing. "The 2 weeks was never real," she said, laughing. "You just keep agreeing, and then you just keep staying. It's a big house and a small old man." And then, with the boy's cat figure 8ing around her ankles like even the animals couldn't read her, she said the sentence I had been waiting 9 days to hear. "I figure by Christmas we get him to put the ranch in a family trust. He's half gone already," she said. "The old fool repeats himself at dinner. The old fool leaves bank statements in a drawer. The old fool. The old fool." 4 times in one phone call by my count, and I sat in my own dark dining room scoring it on the back of an envelope like a man keeping innings. I want to confess something to you about that hour, because this story doesn't work if I lie to you in it. Part of me enjoyed it. I had been sick to my stomach for 9 days. Sick at dinner watching the boy flinch. Sick in the hallway smelling my son's bourbon. Sick to my back teeth of shuffling and repeating myself and playing dead while a swindler measured my coffin. And that phone call burned all the sickness off clean, the way a torch burns paint, because she was not improvising anymore. She was confessing, with timestamps, to a camera she didn't know existed, and every word went straight into a folder my attorney had labeled with a single word I won't repeat here. Sunday morning, she was radiant. She came down early and made a big country breakfast, eggs, biscuits, the works, on my card, and she even fixed the boy a plate without being asked, the first time all week, because company was coming and the family portrait needed all its faces. She put on a dress. She asked me twice if her hair looked all right, Daddy, and called the whole thing such a lovely idea, getting to finally meet my friends. My son ate 3 biscuits and said 4 words. The boy ate everything on his plate and looked at me once, on his way down the back hall, a level, steady, asking look, and I gave him one nod, and he closed his door, and I heard the lock click, and the cat was in there with him, and that was every living thing I loved in this world accounted for and behind one door. At 5 minutes to 3, I stood at my front window and watched the county road. My hands were quiet. I had buried a wife, built a company, and sold it, and I'm telling you that the longest stretch of time I have ever lived through was the last 5 minutes before that doorbell rang. The doorbell rang at 3 o'clock exactly, and my daughter-in-law answered it herself, smiling, smoothing her dress, the lady of the house. My old friend from the shop came in first, 6'4", 70 years old, a retired bull rider gone gray, and he looked at her outstretched hand and walked past it without a word and took the chair next to mine and crossed his arms and did not take his eyes off her for the next 40 minutes. Behind him came the investigator carrying a banker's box, and behind him my attorney, 4'11" of navy pantsuit with a leather portfolio under her arm, and behind her came a tall, gray-haired woman in slacks and a pressed shirt, and a younger man with a buzz cut, both wearing the kind of polite blankness that has a holster somewhere under it. It took my daughter-in-law about 4 seconds. I was watching for it, the face, like my attorney said, and I saw the smile hold while the eyes did the arithmetic, guest, lawyer, and then the last 2, and the smile stayed up, but everything behind it left the building. "Daddy," she said. "Who?" And I said, "Sit down." And something in how I said it, the first honest sentence I'd spoken to her in 9 days, sat her down. My attorney introduced everyone by occupation. At the word sheriff, my son made a sound, just air, like a man taking a body shot, and put his face in his hands, and I understood then that he had known, maybe not all of it, but a man doesn't fold at the word sheriff unless some part of him has been waiting for it. Then my attorney opened the portfolio and read. She did not rush and she did not perform. She read the way she has read depositions for 50 years, like a woman reading temperatures off a gauge. The real name and the name before that. The warrants, both states. The school teacher and her husband in Carson City. $46,000 in transfers sized to swim under the alarms. The widower in Oregon. The eviction. And the police knocking on an empty apartment 6 hours behind them. The dealership. The pocketed down payments. The old friend who declined to press charges. My bank statements photographed in my own office on the 4th afternoon. 11 minutes on camera. Timestamp in the corner. The phone calls from my porch quoted. The old fool read aloud 4 times in a 72-year-old lawyer's level voice, while the old fool sat across the coffee table with his arms folded and watched the color drain out of a face by degrees, performing concern, then performing confusion, then performing outrage, then, somewhere around the school nurse's report, around the words contusion in the shape of an adult hand, not performing anything at all anymore, just white, just caught, just done. She bolted bolted on the nurse's report, up off my sofa and 3 steps toward the front door before she registered the deputy standing in front of it, and he didn't move a muscle, and she stood there in the middle of my front room in her nice dress with every eye on her, and the sheriff pushed off the door frame and said very quietly, "Ma'am, stand up straight, hands behind your back." What came out of her then I won't put in print. 12 seconds of it by my count before the cuffs clicked, threats and filth and my son's name, and then, when that got nothing, lawsuits. She would sue me for every dime, every acre, and the deputy nodded along politely, a man who has heard the whole catalog, and walked her out my front door and folded her into the back of an unmarked car in my driveway. Through the window I watched her screaming in the back seat, mouth working behind the glass like a television with the sound off, and I felt my old friend's hand land on my shoulder, once, heavy, and that is the only reason I know I was swaying. And then there was my son, alone on the edge of the armchair, and one piece of paper. My attorney set it on the coffee table and squared it to the edge and gave him the choice in the same gauge-reading voice. Option 1. Sign a voluntary surrender of guardianship today, witnessed. Be out of Texas in 72 hours. No contact with the boy or with me unless the boy, grown, chooses to make it. Walk out the door. Whatever Nevada wanted from him about the dealership was between him and Nevada, but he would walk out of this house a free man. Option 2. Stand with his wife, and the second car in the driveway had a seat in it too, and I would fight him for the boy from across a courtroom with $22 million and that nurse's report. And she leaned in slightly and said, "And you will lose, sweetheart, the way other people breathe. I had been warned. The weak ones stand with the strong ones." I had carried my one stupid coal of hope in my shirt pocket all the way to that minute, and I stood there with it while my son looked at the paper and looked at the door his wife had just gone through and looked last of all at me. And I do not know what he saw. An old man, I suppose. The kitchen table he sat at when he was a boy. The funeral he missed. The 11 phone calls. I don't know. But his face came apart, all the way apart, like lake ice in March, and he picked up the pen and he said, "Where do I sign?" He signed it at my dining room table with the investigator as witness, and his hand shook so bad the second signature climbed uphill. And when it was done, he put the pen down and put his head in his hands and cried. And it was not a man's crying. I let him finish. I did not touch his shoulder. I did not tell him it was all right, because it was not all right, and he had spent 41 years being told things were all right that were not. Then I told him there was a duffel in the garage with $3,000 in it and the keys to his mother's old sedan, which I had kept, because I could not sell the things she drove to choir practice. I told him to be out of Texas by Wednesday morning. I told him to get sober, get work, and become, in 5 years or in 10, a man his son could stand to be in a room with, and that nobody on this earth could do that part for him. His mother and I had tried for 4 decades, and it could not be done from the outside. He said yes, sir, to all of it, to the floor, and he took the bag and the keys, and I stood on my porch and watched my only child drive down my driveway and turn onto the county road, and the dust hung in the air after him the way dust does, longer than you think it has any right to. Then I walked back through my house, past the sofa where her perfume was still sitting, down the back hall, and I knocked on the guest room door and said, "It's Grandpa. You can come out now." The lock clicked. The door opened. He stood there holding the cat against his chest, both of them looking up at me, and he checked my face the way he checked every face, and then he asked it, the whole question of his whole life, in 3 words. "Are they gone?" "They're gone," I said. "Both of them. And you're home." And that boy came apart against my shirt, quiet, the way he did everything, and I got down on the floor of that hallway, an old man with bad knees and $22 million and one thing left in the world worth a dime, and I held on.